Hi there, I'm Janette and I'd like to welcome you to my little slice of creative bliss. I'm super excited to be guesting with W+9 in their new release. Today I'm featuring the gorgeous Christmas Rose Bouquet and coordinating die. I've used ZIG Clean Color Real Brush Markers and Nuvo Glitter Gloss Pen to color this card. Super easy, anyone can do it, and yes, that means you. To begin, I've stamped the Christmas Rose Bouquet in W+9 Pure Color Black Dye ink onto Canson Montval watercolor paper. This ink is waterproof, which I love, but I did go ahead and emboss it with Versamark and clear embossing powder as well. No need to stamp it 2 times with the Versamark and then with the dye ink. Just ink up with Versamark and then the black dye ink right over the Versamark and then stamp onto the paper. If you find that you did not get a good crisp impression, you can repeat that as necessary. Emboss as you normally would. I'm using wine red ZIG Clean Color Marker to lay down color in the area I want to be the darkest. Then I'm blending out with a clear Nuvo glitter gloss pen. It acts like water but has a ton of shimmer. When blending, even when just using water, be sure to contact all of the ZIG color, the pigment that you've laid down. Some colors will change hues just a smidge when dampened, and unless that's a look you're going for, you may not be too happy about it. So be sure to, if you're going to get some of it wet, get it all wet. I like to place the pigment at the base of each petal where it attaches to the flower and anywhere that the petal is beneath or behind another object, such as another petal or leaf. This provides depth to your image by recessing the dark area and pulling forth the light area. Then blend out the pigment to create highlights in other areas. I tend to like to leave a touch of white or near white on each petal. You can even lift color by clearing the glitter pen on a scrap paper to remove any trace of color and then going back to your petal and lifting more color. Often I like to use smooth Bristol paper with my zigs, and normally it holds up well and stamps beautifully. However, if you know or think you might be scrubbing your paper any or going back into wet areas, then the Canson Montval is the way to go. It won't pill like Bristol can with heavy use. Next, I've used Scarlet Red to give an orangish hue to the secondary flowers and set them apart from the focal point. I blended the Scarlet Red just as I did the wine red in the previous step. To deepen the contrast of the petals further, I've used Deep Red. I have kept a tighter rein on the deep red and only used it near the base of the petals and the places I want to appear to have the darkest shadows. I don't want to lose the lighter wine red that I applied earlier. Only blend the deep red maybe a scant third of the way through the petal. If you want a deeper contrast, add an even darker color closer to the petal base, maybe 1/8 or so of the whole petal. For less contrast, use lighter colors, lift colors, or leave a deeper shade out completely. That's the fun thing about crafting in general. We get to do it however we want. There are no rules, no boundaries. You use what you want, when you want, how you want. You do you, however works for you. The truth is, if I went to create this same card again, it would look different. I could take the same exact products that I've already used and it would turn out differently the second time. So when somebody goes to recreate it, it's going to turn out differently for them too. And that is normal. That is great. And that's how it should be. How boring would it be if all of the cards we created looked the same? Blah, no thanks. I will say that anytime I watercolor with zigs or more traditional watercolors, I try to avoid painting right next to each other in areas that are still wet. As much as possible, I want to avoid any bleeding that I didn't plan for. Sometimes that can lead to happy accidents, but that's not always the case. The leaves are tackled in the same manner as the petals. For those, I have used mid-green and olive green. Again, applying the most amount of pigment near the base of the leaves or where they tuck under one another. I've also added a smidge to the tips of several of these leaves. Some of the leaves I have just used the darker shade and some just the lighter shade. I like the variation of color for these leaves. Again, clear the sparkle pen on a scrap piece of paper as needed in order to lift more color to lighten an area. The Nuvo glitter gloss pen with the zigs dries fairly quickly, so it only needs to be set aside for a short while to dry. In the meantime, I've got a tip for you. The Christmas Rose Bouquet has this amazing swag that I'm using for the card today, but it also has an independent flower and a few leaves. They can be used to create smaller arrangements or build out the swag to be even more extravagant. Tip number 1. Here I'm trimming the dies apart, but I'm leaving the entire set of interior dies together. These are smaller dies for the single flower and the leaves. Many dies are manufactured nested this way, stacked one inside the other where possible to save space. Place the connected dies with a cut side down. Nest each stamp into the matching die. Then you can pick up the stamps with a lid of a MISTI or an acrylic block, stamp them, line up your dies, and then run them through your die cutter in one swoop, and you've got all 4 or 5 images all cut out at one time. Tip number 2. Create a template with a die for precise cutting. It's a total disappointment when you've colored some fabulous image and then it comes out of the die cutter with an uneven border. Boo to that. I'm sure we've all done it. I have many times. Now I run the die through my die cutting machine with a scrap of paper to create a template. Then I use that template to line up over my stamped image so I can see exactly where it will cut. Once you have a good visual placement, tape it with micropore or low tack washi tape, nest the die, cut side down, and then send it through the die cutter again. Reduce or eliminate the margin for error, I say. Save the template with your dies to use again for in the future. I'm using a polka dot and a stripe from the Sweet Nothings by Fancy Pants paper pad. I've laid my image down on the card and placed a tiny tick mark at the top and the bottom where I want my paper to meet behind the image. First, take the polka paper and make a mark at the widest point that the paper will be. Then go ahead and trim straight down that side using the mark you made as a guide, and also cut the panel to a card height of 5.5 inches. Line up again and mark for the narrow end, and then make the angled cut lining up your 2 marks on your favorite cutter. I'm using the Fiskars trimmer with a wire guide, and that really helps to have a visual on where exactly you will be cutting. Tip number 3, line up your A2 folded card base, finished at 4¼ by 5.5 inches, into the corner of a MISTI to use as a guide when adhering your papers. I've used Tombow Mono Liquid Glue. I prefer to have a little wiggle room, and the 90-degree angle of the MISTI makes for perfect placement every time. Then take the stripe paper, first marking the widest point, trimming vertically down that line, and horizontally to the height of the card. I trim mine to leave the white stripe at the top and at the bottom for balance. Then line up again and mark the narrow point. Trim the paper once again, lining up your marks at the top and at the bottom to get the correct angle. No math here, thanks. My daughter is a math major. She didn't get that from me. Again, use the 90-degree corner of the MISTI in order to aid in perfect placement of your card layers. Guys, we have a lot of products at home that we can use to make our lives easier in card making. This is one of them, and I use it all the time. Next, I've used the Tombow Power Tabs in order to give the Christmas Rose Bouquet a little bit of dimension. You could also use just traditional foam tape, and that would be a little bit taller than these low-profile Tombows. Flip and trim away any overhanging elements. For the final touches, I gold heat embossed the sentiment from another stamp set of the W+9 new release, the Crew Garden Club, and added ivory seashell Nuvo crystal drops. Thank you so much for joining me today as I feature W+9's new release Christmas Rose Bouquet. Such a gorgeous set. I hope you pick up one of your own, and if you do, be sure to tag myself, Janette Cosson, and W+9 so we can see the amazing things you are creating. For more information or products, follow the links below. If you like what you've seen here, subscribe. To get notifications with each new video, click the bell. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.